National Christian Youth Convention stood out like a police baton at a riot. It commenced with a great procession through the streets of Sydney. The procession was headed by the leaders of the Methodist Church, the President-General, the President of the New South Wales Conference, the Secretary of the Conference, the Reverend Alan Walker, the Missioner to the Nation, and the Reverend Rex Mathias, National Secretary. And here the Methodist Crusader Choir, under the leadership of their conductor, Mr. Roy Scotter, and don't they look gay and happy and grand as they come marching along the streets. Delegates came from all over Australia and beyond the seas, Fiji and Tonga, the Northern Territory and Tasmania with their banners with them. Western Australia had been travelling all the week, and some of them had only arrived that morning, and they were there on time to be in the procession that moved off from the Domain. The Queensland delegation. 7,000 delegates marching in this great procession. 10,000 people lining the streets of the city of Sydney. And the Victorian contingent. And as they march, they sing. There were children from the Sunday schools. The nurses from the War Memorial Hospital. People representing the women of the church and the men of the church, line upon line of them. Members of the Methodist Girls' Comradeship, members of the Methodist Order of Knights in their regalia. Presently they came to the town hall where the great meeting was held, presided over by the President of the New South Wales Conference, the Reverend A.G. Manifield. The congregation was singing the great Methodist hymn of the Wesleys, "Oh, for 1,000 tongues to sing my great Redeemer's praise." The President-General, with Dr. Roy L. Smith in the front with him, the audience in the gallery, the choir. Everybody seemed to belong to this great family, and all these delegates crowded into the City Hall of Sydney, and 7 churches and halls were filled by people who couldn't get into the town hall. And then the Crusader Choir sang None Other Lamb. The choir has become famous throughout Australia. Mr. Scotter, their conductor, is Roy to them all, and can they sing? And the Reverend Rex Mathias, the National Secretary, makes the announcements at the opening meeting. He seems to have stirred everybody up as he makes his comments about the week's happenings that are in front of the members of the Youth Convention. And then the President calls upon the Reverend Alan Walker, the Missioner to the Nation, to address the convention. Mr. Walker received a tremendous ovation as he began the opening address, saying, "Young Australians, we come today to the climax of months, and those responsible for its organisation would say years and years of planning. It would be an entrancing picture," he went on, "if we drew a line from the places from which we have come to this town hall. Let me," he said, "welcome you, all of you, in the name of the mission to the nation. We believe God summoned this convention, and with faith and courage, we go forward. And he had everybody ready to go forward with him too. What oratory! What a master of the art of preaching this man Walker is. He held the audience spellbound even at the beginning of the convention. The concluding hymn, and now to the great Manufacturers' Hall at the Sydney Showground on Monday, where we see Miss Beryl McLaughlin, the organising secretary, outlining the convention arrangements. And here the assembly representing the youth of Australia and beyond the seas join in a great hymn of praise. The guest missioner, the Reverend Dr. Roy L. Smith of America, gives the first of his outstanding lectures entitled God Works in Creation. Dr. Smith is one of the most stimulating writers and speakers of American Protestantism. He is a minister of the Methodist Church and has a most distinguished academic record. He is a Bachelor of Divinity of Garrett Bible Institute, a Master of Arts from Northwestern University, and a Doctor of Sacred Theology from the University of California. In 1940, he was named as one of the 7 most representative American preachers. Beryl McLaughlin, the organising secretary, is indicating the arrangements for the 75 study groups that were to be held during the convention. They met every morning under most competent leaders. David Barkler in the foreground at the organ, and Mr. Walker speaking a moment before the conclusion of the morning session following Dr. Smith's tutorial. The session concludes with a hymn of praise. What a wonderful sight it was, and what a wonderful thing it was to be one of those 2,500 delegates in this great hall. The singing was magnificent. Imagine what it meant to people coming from tiny little places way out in the far distant back blocks of this country. And now something of the study groups. 75 such groups scattered through the grounds of the Sydney Showground. Alicia of Fiji in one of the study groups. A former missionary to Fiji was leading one of the groups. An Aborigine boy. A Fiji Indian in a group. They went, of course, for the shade of the trees, and they were all keenly interested in their studies. This group was so interested they went into the cattle judging ring to study. Another group, representative of every state in the Commonwealth. They were vitally interested in their study. Here, the Reverend Norman Pardee, a former federal director and pioneer of the Crusade for Christ, speaks with his group. Samuel Frank from Fiji joins in the discussion. The Reverend Norman Miller from South Australia speaks with the members of his group. How happy they were, too, to have with them the 4 Aborigine boys from Arnhem Land, Roy and Stephen and Jackie and Philip. Delegates are returning from some of the tours and excursions up to the Blue Mountains. My, what a wonderful day they'd had. There were no discipline problems and everybody was so happy. One great family. And the people that had always thought that Sydney was a terrible place in which to live, well, I think they had some new ideas when they went away. And this bus had come all the way from Moorland in Victoria, bringing the whole company, caravanning as they came along the way. What a wonderful time they'd had together, too. I wish you could see some of the things that were written on the back of this bus. And here, the bus which took some of the company down to Palm Beach and around some of the nearer sites of the city of Sydney. They look as though they don't want to get out of the bus anyway. They've had such a great day. Buses and trips everywhere. And here the Moorland bus with the sign on the right, Pass On, P-A-R-S-O-N. One of the most interesting sessions each evening at 5:30 was called Windows on the World. Here, I suppose you would say, are Methodists square dancing on showground property. My, what fun and games they had. Each evening they learned games from different countries in the world. And they look at those people there. I guess it's the first time they'd ever had a try, but they're not doing too badly at it after all. I wouldn't mind being one of them there myself. Be frank, which one would you prefer to be? And the man behind it all was Mr. Clive Smith, the principal of the YMCA College for Leadership Training in Sydney. There he is, just walking across to the left there. He was the Director of Recreation for the whole of the convention. Don't they look happy? I wonder what that fellow was thinking as he walked by. Some of them couldn't get tea over early enough to be out to learn new games and be in all the fun each evening. They had a marvellous time one night with the Aborigine boys, teaching them new games and songs. Mrs. Clive Smith rehearsing for the Festival of Youth, Green Grow the Rushes, oh. They sang it with gusto there on the Saturday evening. And there is Mr. Smith. I think he's just coming close by you there now. You'll see him in the foreground. I think he's keeping an eye on his wife's conducting. I'm not sure, but we owe a great deal to him, I know that. And Mr. Scotter rehearses the choir for the song Mission to the Nation, Hurrah, Hurrah. Mr. Walker raises a few points in the handbook and conference study book. He can really pour it out too. The Reverend R.J. Williams, the State Director of the Mission to the Nation in New South Wales, addresses the convention. The Crusader Choir sang each evening, and this night Mr. Matthias was to be the speaker for the evening meeting. 500 of them in this Crusader Choir. What an inspiration for any speaker. And they came every night. The Reverend Rex Matthias, the National Secretary to the Mission to the Nation, gives his address. He speaks regularly on the Yarra Bank in Melbourne. And can he speak? You can almost feel as if he's waiting for a heckler to throw a question at him. And look at those eyebrows. Up and down they go. Why, they'd silence any hecklers. What a strong face he has, and what a lovely, spirited man he is. God works was the theme of the convention, and the cross with figures reaching up, seeking the reconciling power of Christ, symbolizes the desire of all to find the power and strength that they so greatly need. On the Wednesday, the chairman of the evening was the Reverend Dr. George Wheen, the director of the New South Wales Methodist Youth Department. Here, Dr. Wheen is welcoming the delegates as the host director in New South Wales. George Wheen urged on the delegates to the convention the importance of the fact that we live in a state of change, in a world of flux and change, and that young people today mustn't be afraid of change. They must take hold upon it and fashion it so that the new society that is established becomes a Christian society. He introduced Dr. Smith from the United States. He described Dr. Smith as coming from the country made up of the people who think of everything as being the biggest in their country. What a preacher and what a speaker this man Smith is. His wit and his humor are unsurpassed. He lifted the company in the hollow of his hand, and everyone loved him. And the most moving session of the whole conference was the service of Holy Communion. What a time of dedication and sacrament it was for us all. Niori from Fiji led the service in prayer. We thank thee, he prayed, O merciful Father, for our fellowship in the blessed company of thy faithful people. And the Australian missioner led us to the table of the Lord, saying, we do not presume to come to this thy table, O merciful Lord, trusting in our own righteousness, but in thy manifold and great mercies. The broken bread, the body of our Lord Jesus Christ, which was given for thee. Preserve thee unto everlasting life. Take and eat this in remembrance of Christ, and feed on him in thy heart by faith with thanksgiving. The delegates came, line upon line of them. It seemed like a field of poppies blowing gently in the breeze as they passed, these young people. I wished at the time that I had been a poet, and if I had written a poem, I'd have called my poem Hands. I would have written about the hands of the young people stretching out, reaching up for the life-giving bread, the hard hands of the young carpenter, the soft hands of the stenographer and the typist, the long, thin fingers of the young student in medicine, seeking, searching, stretching up for the life-giving bread. Jesus, and shall it ever be a mortal man ashamed of thee? Till then, nor is my boasting vain, till then I own a Saviour slain. And oh, may this my glory be, that Christ is not ashamed of me. On the Saturday evening, there was a great festival of youth. It rained and rained. The delegates were so anxious to go ahead, and in answer to the call of "Where are you from?" they shouted from each state and district responding to the call from the compere. You can see the water lying about on the track in the arena at the showground. It was pouring with rain, but it didn't dampen their spirits. Young Australians love sport, and every sport that you can imagine was represented. There was volleyball and gymnastics. There was vaulting and there was tumbling. There was basketball and there were rhythmic exercises, calisthenics and badminton. Of course, what with the wet weather, it was very dangerous indeed, carrying through this program of outside activities. There were championship teams taking part. The tumbling, for instance. The leader was none other than Brian Blackburn, who is the all-round champion gymnast of Australia. Here again you can see the tumbling led by Brian Blackburn. It was simply a marvelous night. When you think of the difficulties under which they worked in the rain, how the audience enjoyed the fun and laughter of it all. And the danger? I can't stress it enough, how very dangerous it was. It's difficult enough to do these in fine weather. Look at this fine piece of work now. How beautiful it is. There's Blackburn, I think. He looks like a dancer coming along there. Incidentally, there was a ballet presented on the arena, and it was wonderful to watch, depicting the struggle between the forces of good and the forces of evil. And of course, the theme of the convention and the festival was the triumph of God and truth. And of course, we had fun and frolic and floats. Here, the first float, and we needed it on that wet Saturday night. Noah's Ark. Oh, Noah, how welcome you were that night. The float that followed, depicting the Sunday School of the Air. A rocket bomb making its way up, and then, for the benefit of our Melbourne friends, there were the Yarra bathers. You know, the Yarra, too thick to drink and too thin to plough. How the people laughed. And then Dr. Smith, I presume. There was some fun about it, for Dr. Smith really did get lost when he arrived in Sydney first. And Ween, director of the Methodist Youth Department in New South Wales, retiring after 16 years, and so they said the Methodist Youth Department was being weaned at last. And here the Cicada Choir, a skit on the Crusader Choir with Roy Scotter as the conductor. And did they have some fun at his expense? He enjoyed it, and all the members of the choir along with him. And softer seats and shorter sermons. After the presentation of Arthur Oliver's play, Truth in the Arena, the delegates were invited to come and take part in a solemn act of dedication. They knelt before the illuminated cross in the center of the showground, a cross high up 21 feet by 11 feet. The rain was pouring down on them, and there they came without their coats in response to the challenge, "Dare you stand for truth?" In very fact, indeed, truth was in the arena in the Sydney Showground at the Youth Convention on that Saturday night. As the strains of the hymn, God is with us, so our brave forefathers sang, died away, they rose and went forth inspired and ready for Christian service. It was a sight never to be forgotten. The President General presided over the final dedication service on the Sunday. The Reverend Alan Walker called on Miss Beverly McLaughlin to come to the dais. He made a presentation to her of a copy of the Scriptures. It was a gift to a consecrated organizing secretary. It was a gift in terms of love and gratitude from all the delegates, for she had made a tremendous contribution to Christ's Church through this convention. Beverly McLaughlin expressed her thanks and then, in typical fashion, went on to make some announcements of the convention later in the afternoon. Here is a picture of the company as they gathered and sat in this wonderful service of dedication. They listened eagerly to the Australian missioner as he called them to give their lives fully and readily to the service of Christ. At least 6,000 people were there at that final dedication service in the Manufacturers' Hall. It was still raining and wet, but nobody's spirits seemed to be dampened. The Crusader Choir that afternoon seemed to sing with even greater enthusiasm and power. And then the Reverend Alan Walker called on Dr. Roy Smith. He wanted to make a presentation to him from the young people of the convention. He told of how Dr. Smith had arrived almost too early at the office, saying, "I'm Smith," in typical humble fashion. And then Dr. Smith spoke a final word to the delegates of the convention. He said to them, "Soon you will be going home, and everyone will look to see what the convention did to you. You are going home to be the convention. You will be all they will ever see or all they will ever know. When you go back from the convention, remember, you are not alone. You will never be the same again. God bless you as you go. God bless you, every one of you, every one." The Reverend Alan Walker pleaded with the young people to come and give themselves in dedication to the service of Christ. He said, "If there is any word written across the teaching of Jesus and the pages of the New Testament, it is the word obedience. If any man loves me, says Jesus, obey my words. They that do the will of God shall know the doctrine. Written into the very gospel of Jesus Christ is the steely demand, obey. The results of obedience are written into the story of the Christian church. Will you then, like Saul of Tarsus, be obedient today to the heavenly vision?" Paul was great, not because he was perfect. He was great because he was obedient. The congregation, under the leadership of Mr. Scotter, sang, "Take my life and let it be." Mr. Walker had appealed to the young people to come, and this was no emotional moment. It was a sacred, solemn hour, planned and prepared for. 6 long days? Many years of planning in terms of leadership, prayer, and grace on the part of the church. And what a harvest was reaped. As young people presently came and made their way in service and sacrifice to the Lord of all life, witnessing to the fact that God works in human experience and human lives. Jesus calls us, o'er the tumult of our life's wild, restless sea. Day by day his sweet voice soundeth saying, Christian, follow me.